G'day ladies and gentlemen, how y'all doing? ScottyD49 here with you once again for the next installment in our competitive focus series looking at the Arks of Omen. Changes going into the first season of Warhammer 40k for 2023 for competitive play. It's going to be really good in today's video because we're going to dig into the points changes, just the core point changes. We won't look at the Imperial armor stuff, but for all the factions in the game to let you know what has changed for your faction or maybe some of the other factions in the game so you're aware of what's going on into this new season. But ladies and gentlemen, before we jump in, I want to thank everyone who has been joining us on the YouTube. I hope that you've been enjoying the content on there, and I hope to be bringing you a lot more throughout the year as well. And thank you so much for hitting that subscribe button, liking, all the comments, all that kind of stuff. Really appreciate you guys. And without further ado, let's jump into it. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, so we're going to be jumping in to looking at some of these points updates. Now, as you can see, I have actually got both the 2022 Mark II Field Manual updates and the 2023 Mark I updates. So we're actually going to be able to have them on the screen for you guys as we go through talking about these so you can actually see the differences on screen. So throughout the video, feel free to pause it, have a look, see what's actually changed and where I am talking about things. But it's going to be a pretty quick run through during each of these. So we're going to start off with the Space Marines. So with the Space Marines, as you can see, there's a fair amount of red on the 2023 side, on that right-hand side there. That's because the Space Marines are probably the biggest winners in terms of the points changes because they have a lot of significant changes that are happening here. So the majority of units have received a change to most of their war gear. As you can see, Captain, for example, has minimal war gear in 2023. If I scroll it down for you guys, there you go. That first Captain, next to no war gear compared to what it was in the previous update for them. So really, that's quite consistent. A lot of the units within the Space Marine Codex, with not just unit points decreasing, but also a lot of different units just going down in points. So say, for example, something like the normal Apothecary standard power armor, not Primaris, has gone down from being 75 points a model to now 65. So small points changes like that per unit has been great. You can see a lot of this bloat where you've got all those unit upgrades that they could be taking is now no longer there, meaning it's a lot easier to construct a list. And also all the chapter command options did also drop in points by about 5 points each. So that means it's cheaper to take stuff like Primaris Tech Marines as Masters of the Forge, for example, or Masters of Sanctity for chaplains, things like that. So you're able to bring in some of that benefit in your army with some of the points changes you have saved when you're building your current lists. Now, we're going to jump in and skip through a little bit of these guys here. I will link both of these documents in the description below as well, so you can kind of compare them for yourself. But going into the chapters, they've restructured it a bit. Instead of doing Ultramarines first, they've done Black Templars and such. But I've gone through and I've had a quick look at which chapters received points reductions or points increases. And so for those who have actually received reductions, we're looking at the Black Templars, some Blood Angel units, the Dark Angels, some Death Watch units, Imperial Fist, Iron Hands, Raven Guard, Salamanders, White Scars, and Space Wolves. Now, a lot of them are benefiting from that free war gear, even in their Codex-specific units, which is really important to note. However, the following chapters have actually received some points increases. Some of the Blood Angels units have gone up by a couple of points, mainly the Death Company, regular Death Company, not Primaris Death Company, and the Death Watch units. So Death Watch Bikes, Terminators, and Veterans have all gone up in points as well, meaning that even though you get the free war gear, in some instances, you're paying more points than you are actually saving by getting that free war gear, which is something just to be aware of when you're constructing these kind of armies for these chapters. And I think when we look at it in conjunction with the balanced data slate, Space Marines are actually going to become a bit more prevalent, and they're going to become a lot more shooting heavy rather than just a lot of the Blood Angels builds we've been seeing Black Templars doing quite well because they've been close combat heavy. We're going to see a lot more shooting come in because of the balanced data slate changes as well, despite the removal of Armor of Contempt, which I think some of these points changes do help with as well. Now, Grey Knights do also see a large number of points drops across the army on some of their core essential units. Stuff like Paladin Ancients or Strike Squads, Inceptor Squads, all decreasing by a couple of points and getting free war gear as well across a lot of the units in the army, very similar to regular Space Marines. Now, whilst they aren't as dramatic as what Space Marines have received, I reckon the changes will still impact their list building because it'll allow you to field some more units, which will help them survive a bit better, especially with Armor Contempt being gone. So from this point, we're going to jump into the rest of the Imperial armies that are listed, which are starting off with the Adeptus Sororitas. Now, the Sisters have received a few points decreases and 1 point increase on a notable unit. Now, the point increase is on the Sister Repentia, which a lot of players are taking a lot of at the moment, and it means that by increasing their points from, I think it's from 14 up to 16, so it's 2 points per model of an increase, it's going to really impact how many you might see in a list, but also the points decreases aren't really too dramatic on the meta builds of what Sisters are taking. So really, you're going to have to see people factor that in terms of, oh, do I really want to take those 3 units of Repentia? Maybe they'll only take 2 because of this points change. Because 2 points per model across 10 models is 20 points. It does make a little bit of a difference. So that is something that Sisters players are going to be aware of, and something you should be aware of as well, that you might see some less Repentia. Going into the next faction, we're going to look at Adeptus Custodes. Now, or Custodes, as some of my friends in chat like to berate me on just calling them Custodes instead of Custodes. Now, Custodes really didn't see too much of a points decrease on some of their core army. Where they did see it is on the Anathema Psychana units, so the Sisters are silenced effectively. Their troop units did drop by a point for the Prosecutors, Vigilators, and Witch Seekers, as you can see on screen. And so, really, the core of a Adeptus Custodes list of what you're seeing at the moment hasn't really changed at all. So nothing too dramatic there for them that you'll see on the tables. Next up, we do come to Officio Assassinorum. Now, the Assassins all did drop by 10 points, which means if you can take them in an Arks of Omen detachment, because I'm not certain where their source is currently, you might see them in an auxiliary support detachment as agents of the Imperium to an Imperium detachment. But it's really, they're few and far between in terms of being seen at the moment. It's just a lot of people are tending just to build their single faction within the Arks of Omen detachment going forward, which we're going to talk a bit more about in the next video. After them, we come into the Ashe Militarum. Now, of course, the Ashe Militarum actually don't have any points changes because they've had their codex be released in the army box, but also at the same time, the official release hasn't occurred, which, as the time of recording, they're actually going to go up for pre-order this coming weekend. So it means that there's no need to update their points without the codex being released. So they're just going to release the codex and the points as is. We may see some points adjustments afterwards, maybe like what we saw with Leagues of Votann, but it's very unlikely at this stage that we may be looking at a points update mid-year for them, or going into the new edition that is rumored to be happening around July. Then, after the Ashe Militarum, we come to an army who's benefiting greatly from a lot of things, which is the Adeptus Mechanicus. Now, as you can see on screen, there's a lot of red on the right-hand side. They received a lot of points drops, as well as some units getting particular war gear for free. So this is really Games Workshop's effort to really help boost their win rate up, in conjunction with the balanced data slate changes. Hopefully, we'll bring them up to at least a 45% win rate, maybe if not 46, 47. Got some points drops in there, so they're going to be fielding more stuff on the battlefield, but at the same time, having some free war gear in there and only paying for the more important stuff, and even those points cost decreasing on those upgrades as well, is really big for some of those key units that you will be seeing with that 5-up invulnerable save on particular units in the army. Next up, we do come to both Imperial Knights and Inquisition. Now, in short, neither of the points for each of these factions has changed at all. They're actually quite well balanced in the meta, particularly Imperial Knights. Inquisition, we're not really sure. They may be illegal in match play at the moment due to content validity, but at the same time, we expect that Inquisition are going to get something at some point within the next 6 months, we hope, so that they're still able to be played at some point within the meta as well. But if I am incorrect, feel free to let me know down in the comments. So I think Imperial Knights not needing changes is still a good thing as well. They're in a good spot in terms of the meta and where they're at with their own win rate. So now we come to Chaos Space Marines. Now, Chaos Space Marines have seen some changes as well. Because things like Abaddon has increased, Terminators have increased, but they've also seen a lot of war gear go to free now instead of you paying for them. as well as Mark Slanesh going up in points from 15 to 20 because of how popular it is. And the only decrease is what you're seeing is the Defiler on its base points cost being decreased. So really, the free war gear will balance out some of those points increases depending on what build you're taking. And I also think with the Arks of Omen changes, it'll mean that we'll only actually be seeing a Baden in Black Legion Arks of Omen armies, which will reduce how prevalent he is in the meta at the moment. Also, same issue with like the Silent King and a few other characters that work like Abaddon as well. But the points change on Terminators may see people take less Terminators, or they might have less units in the army. But I think the free war gear that other units get that you could take in your army will balance that out. Then we come to Death Guard. So Death Guard actually don't really see too much in terms of changes. They do see a couple of unit decreases, particularly on like character units in the elite slot. You can see a lot of red there for them. And so they do get some more free war gear on a lot of things, very similar to what Chaos Space Marines did, because very similar units like Predators, Vindicators, all those kinds of things will get some war gear for free now. This, again, will help the Death Guard field some more units previously. However, it will hopefully help them balance out the loss of Armor and Contempt, because them, along with Thousand Suns, actually do benefit quite a lot from Armor and Contempt in Nephilim. So it means that with it gone, they're actually going to be a lot less durable. Then we come up to the Thousand Suns, which it's World Eaters next on the previous one. Then we go into Thousand Suns. So we'll do Thousand Suns first, then we'll go to World Eaters. So Thousand Suns saw some points changes on particular units and free war gear on particular units. But the thing is a lot of the current units you're seeing in competitive Thousand Suns lists didn't see much change at all. So there's no changes to make account for Armor of Contempt. So it really means that Thousand Suns might be a little bit worse off going into Arks of Omen in terms of how you might want to run them with your current meta builds if you are running Thousand Suns. Now, the one thing I will say about World Eaters, going back to World Eaters here, is that nothing's changed for them. We're still anticipating their codex within the next month. Looks like the new Chaos Demon Prince is also up for pre-order as well. So there's a lot of stuff going into this new book, which should be dropping within the next month or so. So it doesn't make sense for them to update the points and just wait for the new codex to come out to update those points. Then we come across Chaos Demons. Now, Chaos Demons actually do see a lot of points changes across a lot of the various factions. Now, bear in mind that the previous points updates were done before the new codex came out, so these points are straight from the codex, so it's a bit hard to compare them between. But bearing in mind that there are things that have dropped in each of the different Chaos Gods, meaning that you'll be able to take different builds or be able to create some new stuff rather than just doing the tried and true. I'm just going to take all the big demons to do all the damage and allow the smaller demons to just do the troop tax and do their thing, run Bellicor, run Bloodthirsters, run Lord of Change, that kind of thing, and have them do all the damage. So we might see some different builds coming out of Chaos Demons going forward as well, which is actually really exciting to see. And I'm really hoping that the demon meta does shake up a little bit going into Arks of Omen as well. Next up, we come to Chaos Knights. Now, Chaos Knights, again, much like Imperial Knights, actually don't see any changes at all in this points update. They're actually in a very similar spot to Imperial Knights in terms of win rates, how well they're doing in the meta. So I think Games Workshop is relatively happy. And personally, from seeing this, I'm quite happy in the win rates and knowing how well Chaos Knights can do. I'm quite happy with how well pointed they are. They're effective at where they are. They're still kind of that gatekeeper army of like the top tables. If your army can deal with knights, you can get through to the top tables. If you can't deal with the knights, then you're still rocking it in the mid tables. Is just kind of where knights are at the moment. Still sitting around that 50% win rate, but they're doing quite well. And so I think not adjusting their points is quite a good change, considering Chaos Knights and Imperial Knights got some objective tweaks that we're going to talk about in the next video as well. Now that kind of covers it for the Chaos Super Faction. Now we're getting into the Xenos Super Faction, starting off with Asayani. Now, the Asayani did receive several points increases and a couple of decreases as well. However, overall, the increases are actually on the competitive units you're seeing. So, like the Farseer on Skyrunner went up from 125 to 135. The Warlock on Skyrunner went up from 35 to 40 points, and individually went up to 40 points from 45. So it's small increases there. Things like Swooping Hawks also went up from 20 points to 25 points per model, I believe, if I'm just scroll through and have a quick look. Yep, Swooping Hawks now 25 points, and they used to be 20. So really, there's a few things that have increased, and they're mainly being taken in those competitive lists. But also the things that have decreased are things like Shroud Runners and Dark Reapers, which you're not really seeing in the meta at the moment. So it's really good to see them drop a little bit. We might see them, and it's kind of Games Workshop's trying to promote some list diversity within the Asciani at the moment as well. Then next up, we do come to Harlequins. Now, Harlequins really don't see too much in terms of points changes because they got so significantly changed as of late, both the previous balanced data slate in October and this balanced data slate. It means that it wouldn't make sense to hit them with points decreases to make up for that fact, because they are still doing so well with a 55 plus win rate at the moment. So they've just changed the points on the Harvester of Torment and the Mirror Architect, increasing them up for the characters, meaning they're a bit more expensive to take. We then move on to the last of the Eldar at the moment, which is the Drukhari. Now, Drukhari actually have got a nice mixture of points in terms of points decreases and some increases depending on the units in question. Things like Rax did increase by 1 point per model. You've got Homunculus that did also increase by 10 points, going from 70 to 80. Witches, though, did drop by 1 point. A few things like that across the army. There's small tweaks here and there, which overall I don't think is really going to affect Drukhari army builds as much. You'll be able to see some stuff maybe not as much, like Rax. A lot of people are loving to run a lot of Rax as troop units at the moment. You might see more Witches now. They're only 10 points a model, and they're going to be able to do a bit more damage with AP -1 in close combat, with Armor of Contempt being gone. So now outside of that, we actually come to the Leagues of Votann. Now, we don't have the points updates in the previous one because they weren't released at that point. But the Leagues of Votann do see some increases once again on their points to really try and bring them back down. But they do see a couple of decreases as well. Particularly the Thunderkin, I believe, have decreased, as well as the Land Fortress did cop a 10-point decrease. Meaning that it's going to be kind of balance them out, but they're still quite strong in the meta and still doing quite well. But hopefully this is kind of the final changes we see for Votann, bringing them down a little bit, bringing into that 55% win rate if they are above that at this stage. I haven't really kept too much tabs on Votann. There've just been a lot of other things like Tyranids, Chaos. All those things have been really kicking around, a lot more prevalent as of late, that have really let Votann slip under a little bit. But I reckon now Votann still having their version of Armor of Contempt, you can't reroll to wound against them. It's really going to mean that we might see them rise up a little bit more with the few factions that are getting knocked down a couple of pegs. So then we do actually then come to Necrons next. Now, Necrons do receive several unit points drops for units that haven't really been seen in the meta or armies in quite some time. Things like Necron Warriors dropped by 2 points per model. Death Marks decreased by 2 points per model as well. Triarch Stalker, I believe, also decreased in points from 120 to 110. Things like that across the army is really decent to see, and it's exciting that even with the balanced data slate changes, they're going to be really interesting going into the next meta, and hopefully this will also promote some list diversity as well. Then we next come to Orcs. Now, Orcs are actually in quite a good spot at the moment in terms of the meta, and this is kind of reflected in some of their points changes. They don't really get much in this change, but mainly what it is it's more war gear items that have changed with a few points decreases. But they're not too prevalent in the meta at the moment, but they are still doing quite well. So they're kind of sitting around that 50-52% win rate as far as I'm aware. So being quite good still at the meta with where their points at. They're not hitting above 55%. I reckon they're pretty good where they are, just promoting some list diversity with dropping some points to be a bit more effective for them. Now, next up, we come to the Tau Empire. Now, the Tau Empire once again have seen some significant points changes made across key units that they use, such as Crisis Suits, Crisis Commanders, Ethereals, and Kroot, really hurting the Tau Empire. And I think that this will really bring down Tau's win rate quite significantly, with Crisis Suits increasing by another 5 points per model base. with commanders going up 10 points per model base, ethereal's gone up by 10 points per model. It's really starting to really hamstrung the Tau army and how much they can actually take, which hopefully, at least my hope is, that they're going to decrease in the meta. There's going to be less of them, and that their win rate will also reflect that, and they'll slowly drop down to maybe around 50% instead of being so high as they currently are. And they definitely are dropping out of the top 5 faction in the game at the moment. And this is kind of, a lot of Tau players are like, this is kind of the final nail in the coffin to determine that for them. Then we come to one of the factions that have received the most changes in terms of points increases, and that is the Tyranids. Now, the Tyranids have been on an absolute reign of terror for the past 6 to 9 months after their codex was released, and these points changes, along with the changes in the balanced data slate, once again, are really trying to knock them off that reign of terror that they've been on. So there've been massive increases on upgrades for the warriors, the Neurothrope and Tervigons have increased, Tyrant Guards increased, Zoanthropes, Venomthropes, Raveners have increased. Like, there's just so many across the army, and so it means that they're going to be able to take significantly less in their armies going into Arks of Omen. And I've already actually seen players locally start to swap out for other factions, and because they believe that these changes will dramatically impact their position in the meta overall. And I think they're right. I think that Tyranids are actually going to drop out of the S tier, and I think they might be B tier, maybe C tier at the moment. We'll see what happens going into Arks of Omen and how they actually do in terms of win rates with their secondary changes and such as well. Then last but certainly not least, we come to the good old Gene Stealer cult. Now, they actually don't see too much in terms of points change. I know it seems like a lot there, but they do see some increases and increases, as well as war gear options reducing and seeing some just become free as well. Really, the more notable changes is a lot of the characters, like the HQs and elite characters, did get some points drops, but also the Atlan Jackals and the Atlan Wolf quads, which are quite popular to take in full 10-man units at the moment with the double quads, have seen the increase in points in the army. I mean, you're not really seeing too much in terms of Gene Stealer cult armies in the meta at the moment and what they're playing. So really, I reckon Gene Stealer cult, this kind of balances out. They may not change too much because the points decreases may help mitigate the points increases depending on your army build. So yeah, I reckon they won't remain too different to what they've been currently. They're still only a small representation in the meta just because of how difficult they are to play and collect. But the players who do play them quite well. I mean, you've got Eric Lathuris here in Australia, Dustin Henshaw over in Canada, and a couple of other people around the world that do play Gene Stealer cults quite well. So there's still kind of that army to keep an eye out on, but at the same time, they're not going to be too prevalent unless a meta is got a lot of local players that play them quite regularly. But that actually brings us through the basic changes of the points updates for the Arks of Omen GT season for 2023, ladies and gentlemen. Alrighty everyone, well I hope that you enjoyed this video where we were talking about the points changes going into the Arks of Omen series. Now, as I said, this is the second video where we're looking at the Arks of Omen changes, and the next video is going to be looking at the GT mission pack itself, what army changes have happened, what impacts that's going to have on your army construction, any secondary changes and changes to the missions as well. So we've got one more installment, and I'm hoping to get that out later this week for you all. But as per usual, guys, if you want to continue this discussion with me, feel free to leave a comment down below. If you like the video, hit that like button. If you haven't already, feel free to hit the subscribe button, turn on that notification bell so you're able to be notified as to when I'm releasing more content here on YouTube. And you're going to want to be doing that because I got some spicy announcements coming up in the next couple of weeks as well for you guys. Now, if you do want to continue this discussion or have more in-depth discussion on these changes, feel free to come and find me when I'm live over on Twitch. I do stream primarily on Tuesday mornings and Friday evenings, Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time currently, with some Saturday streams, whether they're going to be at tournaments or they're going to be me hobbying at home at the moment. But we can continue the conversation there as well. And if you do want to financially support the stream but don't want to subscribe on Twitch, feel free to check out my Ko-Fi link down below where you can have a membership supporting me and the channel and the content that I'm creating for as little as $4 Australian a month. And there are benefits to go along with that, but any financial support you do decide to give through Ko-Fi is really appreciated. You can give a one-off tip or buy some merchandise as well. But ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me in this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got a lot out of it, and I'll catch you in the next one.